So are there any most important issues that you want to cover, or we'll take it as it goes? Yeah.
Okay, everybody, welcome once again to the Meat and Potato Show, Conservative Talk. Ready? We can do that again. Okay, welcome everybody once again to the Meat and Potato Show, Conservative Talk and Awesome Rock. I, of course, am your host, Christopher Mader, and the candidate interviews roll on here on the Meat and Potatoes 2012 Conservative Media Network. My next guest, he's a UC Berkeley graduate, and he has a master's degree in international affairs from George Washington University and a master's degree in journalism from Columbia. He spent 10 years as a war correspondent and, of course, a U.S. civilian in Afghanistan and Iraq. He is running as a Republican out of the 5th Middlesex District here in Massachusetts as a state fourth position of state representative, and that covers Natick, Sherborne, Millis. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Doug Grindle. Doug, thank you so much for coming on. I want to get into your Afghanistan, the time that you spent there, but the very first question I ask all the candidates, what got you involved in wanting to run for state representative? What was the impetus?
Well, I was over in Afghanistan, and I was working there for 4 years with the U.S. government, and saw that the U.S. government helps thousands of people every month, and it's a good feeling to help people. And so I came back and saw that there's a lot of things that we could do to make life a lot better here. It's simply not happening. So I said to myself, well, you can either run now, or you can look back in 30 years and say, you know, you could have tried to help, you didn't bother, and I think I would be disappointed in myself looking back if I hadn't run.
Certainly. What was it, Mike Dictator said something about the worst decision he ever made was not running against Barack Obama in 2008, as senator in 2008, and that's interesting. That you also have to, you have to look at children and grandchildren someday, and they'll say, Dad, Grandpa, what did you do? Especially with your degrees and your experience in life, you have to take that, don't you?
Well, that's just it. But the nice thing about my life is I've been inspired by a bunch of people, and most specifically the people I saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, who spent literally months and years of their lives serving the country, trying to make our country here safer, but at the same time trying to make the lives of the people there in Iraq and Afghanistan better. And frankly, a lot of those people were gone away from home for 15 months at a time without coming back, and it's an inspiring thing to see people like spend their lives trying to help the lives of others.
Now, a lot of the media that was out there was a lot of spin. You know what I'm talking about. It always seems to happen. I remember during the Gulf War, the media went over there, and there was a lot of spin on that too. And I mean negative spin. You were vetted. I mean, it shows a picture of you. I mean, you're in black hair and everything. You were right there. So, you saw the people, and you had that experience of the people giving of themselves. When you would run into other people from other media, did you see that bias? Did you see that spin that was going on? And what was your reaction to that? That is, if you saw that.
Well, this is the biggest limitation, I think, that the traditional media had in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of time, effort, and money to get out in the field and go on patrols. And if you don't go on patrols, if you don't do that, then you won't really understand the situation as to what it's like. And if you stay in a hotel room or a compound, you rely upon stringers or local guys to go out and do the legwork for you, then it's a completely different sense as to what's going on. So when I was there, I spent my entire time as a reporter, as an embedded reporter. So I would go and pick up my press pass in Baghdad or in Kabul or in Bagram Air Base outside of Kabul. And then from there, I would go from base to base to base to base and report on what the soldiers were doing, what the troops were doing, what the locals' experiences were like. And that was true for most of Iraq and almost all of Afghanistan. And so you would end up basically going on patrol with the soldiers time after time after time. And this is the reason it's difficult for the traditional media to do that, simply because it's a manpower issue. Is that if you have one guy and you have to cover, for instance, you're a news service and you have one guy and you have to cover basically all the developments, whether it's the political, the health, the educational, the sectors, and then how do you fit that in and also go out on patrol? Because if going on patrol means that you have to go and get sent by the military out to a major base, then they have to send you to a satellite base, and just to get out there can take 2 or 3 days, and then you have to get back, that's 2 or 3 days, which means that if you think about it...
So you're camping out there with the guys.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's the only way to really get the story. And so what will happen is that most of the... Some of the big newspapers, like the New York Times, might have 15 guys over there, counting the locals as well. So they're pretty well staffed up, but everybody else, I mean, you only really see a handful of reporters that do that will go on patrol all the time or reasonably often. I mean, John Burns from the Associated Press is a good guy. He's been almost everywhere because he would go out and see for himself. Of course, the AP had people back in the main office to handle the other stuff when he was out. And so, but the problem is like most of these outlets don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. And so what happens is you get a bunch of people spend most of their time reporting off of each other, reporting off of their contacts in the capital, and they don't really understand what's going on because most of the guys that you hire in the capital are from the capital. And so, yeah, you call up provincial governors, but now you're going to get a spin from provincial governor. And so I would time and time again get things like generals say things like, oh, these are bitter renders, it's like nothing. And so the problem is that when you go on patrol and you see these guys out there, and the fights are escalating, is you know that it's not true. But if you're not out there to see the fights are escalating, then you don't know it's not true. And so this is the other, and then there's a flip side. In Iraq, when, you go over there, I used to go 4 times a year, and so I went there one year, I went there in November. And it was just terrible, absolutely terrible. I mean, you just couldn't really see how that would possibly come right. Go back there in January, and in the meantime, in the month and a half I was gone, is that they stood up all the Sunni Sons of Iraq guys, because the U.S. hired them all on, put them on the payroll. Most of the insurgency, a lot of the insurgency rather, evaporated at that point, because they hired between 85 and 125,000 guys who were previously fighting them. So all of a sudden, you're in like the worst areas possible, and the opposition is manning checkpoints, and they're protecting you. And you're just like, well, this is the best thing ever. But I'll tell you what, it's like how if you're a reporter and you're working for one of the major traditional outlets, and you don't go out and you don't see, hey, all of a sudden, what, this checkpoint here, that checkpoint there. It's not the same thing. You don't get the same gut feeling when you're going down in the back of a Humvee thinking, oh, that's the guy that last month would have been planting IEDs, and this month he's like, he's being paid to wave the AK-47 in the direction of Al-Qaeda, and now I'm not going to get blown up. Thank you very much. This feels much nicer. You don't get that if you spend most of your time in the compound in the center of the capital.
Well, what happens now is that, I mean, obviously you know what's going on in the news. I mean, what has happened as far as that collapse? Is it, obviously you must have interviewed people in the Malachi administration and the Karzai administration. Were you able to talk to that? Are they part of the problem why things in Iraq specifically are falling apart now? I know you haven't been there since, but what's going on with that? Can you give us a little insight?
Well, this is why it happened, is because, and this is a basic fundamental truth that most people don't really grasp very well. Americans, they like to point fingers and they say, hey, look, there's that guy Karzai, he's not corrupt. Well, they say he's corrupt, but he's not corrupt. All of his family are corrupt, and he allows that to happen. There's this guy Maliki, and he hates Sunnis. And, and the thing is, so we point fingers like that. But this is the fundamental reason why this happens, is that America has a tendency to shortchange its allies. And we think back to like Vietnam, Diem got killed by our allies on our watch, and elected president of that country got killed, and we approved it. So what happens is, like, fast forward to Iraq, fast forward to Afghanistan, and do we say to those people, hey, I'll tell you what, you guys do the right thing, we're going to be with you shoulder to shoulder for the next 15 years, the next 10 years, whatever it's going to take, and, we're going to, I'm not talking like a lot of money, but I'm just saying, don't worry about it, we'll be here. Support. Right. And so what happens is, no, we don't do that. And what happens is, if we look at someone like Karzai, we get someone like Carl Eikenberry in there, who was a general in Afghanistan for a while, and then he was the ambassador for almost 2 years, and he would say Karzai's corrupt, Karzai sucks, Karzai's corrupt, Karzai sucks, for 2 years. And so what happens is, Karzai gets the impression from the Americans that the Americans are not to be trusted, that they don't support them, and we reinforce that feeling by saying we're not going to guarantee you, a certain amount of money because we absolutely understand that you bring in $1 billion a year, take $6 billion to run the government. We are absolutely not going to guarantee that we will give you the extra $5 billion for the next 10 years, and therefore he's just like, no, I'm going to get cut off. And now, because clearly the ambassador says that I'm corrupt and he hates me, and it's very personal in Afghanistan and Iraq as well. And so then they get the impression like America's going to cut and run, and it's very, and so what happens then is that they say, I can't trust America, so who can I trust? And guess what? It's like the people they can trust end up being corrupt. They're enmeshed in they're in it for their personal gain. They're ex-warlords. They're like not very savory characters. And so what happens is that we push our allies into internal alliances that we disagree with because we won't give them the time of day.
I'm going to ask a question, and you can refuse to answer it if you want to. It's kind of controversial, but I've had this conversation with several people before. One of them, a former guest on my show, who was a Navy SEAL and was over there, and he didn't mince words at all. Is it a primitive culture, a very primitive way of life over there? Primitive in their mindset. We go over there, we think of ourselves as very not only affluent, but at a higher level, more technologically advanced, more evolutionarily advanced, mentally advanced. Do you see that day-night thing when you go over there and you're talking to just somebody who lives in a mud hut, who might not be able to read or write? Do you see that type of primitive mentality kind of all over the place? Is that part of the problem?
Well, let me preface my comment by saying that I worked for 4 years with the U.S. Army and the U.S. Agency for International Development in Kandahar and Zabul provinces, and I spent a lot of time in the most far-flung, stupidest, dangerous, yes, but places, districts, the places in the middle of nowhere. And so this is what happens. This is what people don't understand about Iraq and Afghanistan, especially Afghanistan is years behind Iraq. So let's talk about Afghanistan. Afghanistan, people live in mud huts. They grow, they're mostly farmers, and they grow grapes and poppy and wheat and, garden vegetables, things like that. What people don't really understand is that A, they have cell phones. B, they have a huge amount of radio, which they can listen to. C, is that the lowest farmer who grows grapes is tied in closely with the international economy because he's exporting grapes. And so the thing is that he can't afford to be that ignorant. And so people say, oh, look at those dumbasses. They live in in mud houses. They they can't read. I'll tell you why they can't read. Because back in 1976, the whole thing kicked off, and they had no schools between 1976 basically and 2001. Right. Not really. I mean, it's not outside the rural areas. And so what happened is so you have this whole generation that really can't read. And so people are just like, well, these ignoramuses, they can't even read for crying out loud. But I'll tell you what these people are is they're people, and they want education for their kids. They want jobs so they can actually sell their produce to the market, and they actually want a bit of health care, and they want the government to help them out in those things. And besides that, they resemble in many ways Americans 150 years ago. Besides that, leave us alone, we'll do it ourselves. And so the thing is that when people are just like, oh, these are ignorant peasants who don't deserve a darn thing. Yes, it's a tribally based society, and much of their society is based upon values, which basically emanates originally from the Quran with some changes because it's some sort of cultural shifts occur from what you're actually learning because it's an oral tradition, blah, 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 blah. So it's Quran-based ideology or philosophy and culture, but it's not an ignorant philosophy or culture. It's simply people that can't read and write, so they get their information other ways. And so the thing is that they're not primitive peasants who don't understand or know anything. They are instead people who have limited education, who live off the land, and who are basically trying to make a living, including providing education to their kids and a bit of health care to their wives, so that when their wives go into labor, they don't die delivering children, which is one of the biggest problems out there. And so, it's not like they're dumb people. They're not. And many of them are very, very smart. And the higher up the social scale you go, the more sophisticated you get.
Mm-hmm. The radicalism that's over there, and I think it's everywhere. We're talking about the Taliban, Al Qaeda. Look at ISIS, what's going on. Very, very radical Islamic. was that always kind of like a pall that hung over the whole atmosphere? You just gave a great description of how much they want to move forward. They want a better life for themselves. But everything, and maybe it's just my own ignorance or just reading the wrong types of newsprint, that there always seems like this cloud of that threat of radical Islam. The Taliban just waiting for the U.S. to pull out so that they can come in, slaughter the people in the village, punish everybody, and just reinstitute their way of life. Was that something that was always there?
When you're over there, just to answer it in the sense, there's two answers to that. One is that the Taliban are different from ISIS, but the Taliban are fundamentally oppressive, brutal, terrible people in the same way that ISIS is. And so when you look at what they will acceptable behavior to them is if they feel that someone is actually opposing them, they will come in and they will shoot them in the head on their doorstep. And that is something ISIS will shoot people just because they don't agree with them. So ISIS is one step beyond the fear. Basically, it's the basic philosophy is the same. And so what you have to understand, I would say, for the people over there is that it's not a normal situation because they have that threat over them. Now, as Americans, as Westerners over there, yeah, we have the threat, but this is the difference. Is every night we go home, or morning, or after the patrol, you go home, you go on base, you have a shower if you're lucky, and you get something to eat. And, there's a porta potty there, it's just fine. These people, they go home, and then they have to wait for the many times inevitable visit from the Taliban saying, what'd you talk about? We're going to stay here for 45 minutes, you're going to tell us everything they said, and then you're not going to talk to them ever again. And so it's a fundamental difference, and so the thing is, and so this is what happens if you stand up to those sort of people. If you're an Afghan and you stand up to the Taliban, you're just like, I'm going to go work actively against you, is that they will they'll give you a couple of warnings, call you on your cell phone, and then they'll try and shoot you. And so, and that's why it's very difficult, for instance, for the interpreters over there, and all those people that actually work on our site actively, and because they will track them down and try and shoot them. And so the thing is that people also don't understand or they don't appreciate, or they just probably don't know, which is fair enough, is that most of the people doing the dying over there are the Afghans, whether it's Afghan civilians, whether it's the Afghan police, which die like flies, or it's the Afghan army, who are actually pretty good, but have to see a lot of action. And there, of course, the Afghans are doing all the dying, not all, but, most of the fighting is all the dying. And so they are, and those people, what do you think happens to them? Now, imagine you're someone like that, and then you're looking at the Americans saying, yeah, we're not going to stick around, don't worry. And not only that, but the Americans...
They're going to zip up.
Exactly. And this is the thing, and so the Americans themselves say that in order to secure a place like Afghanistan, you need 400,000 troops on the ground. Okay, that's just like a regular counterinsurgency sort of ratio to the population. So, for a couple of years ago, went on for about a year, the administration, Joe Biden especially, was just like, I think these guys don't need that many. Let's have 250,000, that's more than enough. Or let's have 200,000, that's even better. And it's just like, are you kidding? Do you know how many millions of people you're going to confine to living under absolute Taliban rule?
Sure.
Because you're ensuring that these vacuums happen. And so finally they settled it, and it's like, it's well over the 300,000, I believe, but still. But people don't have a basic appreciation of what it's like over there.
And it's not, I understand that people are frustrated. It's been a very long war that's going on there, but this is part of the strategy that we just have to accept. I mean, you just said it, and, we don't want to stay after X amount of years. We're going to pull out, and we send that message. But in order for us to actually succeed, not only are we going to have to stay there many years, but we're probably going to have to keep a presence there. I use the analogy of, Europe and in Japan, but that's a completely different ball of wax, a completely different ideology over there. But that's essentially what we're going to have to do. But we also have this type of mentality here in America where people are saying, oh, why do we have the bases over there? Oh, it's all for oil. Oh, it's to keep the poppy trade going, and we're protecting all of that. I see those. I completely disagree with them. But we are going, it's going to fall apart. It's going to turn into Iraq if we completely pull out by the end of this year. We've got to stay.
I mean, that's true. I mean, I think that it's very difficult to put it this way, if we pulled out, this is what would happen. It's like, is that we would no longer really be serious about giving them the handful of billions every year, like make sure the country gets going. It would just get swept under the rug, just like Vietnam back in 1974. So that would all erode away pretty quickly.
Right.
And then what would happen is like you've got a government that no longer has the money to pay its salaries, that no longer has the money to actually buy bullets. And the whole thing would just fall apart. And so what happens when something falls apart? Then the Taliban come back in. And then what happens when the Taliban comes back in is that then you get the Pakistani Taliban coming in. Then next you know, Al-Qaeda is coming back in. And then it's just you're back to square one. And then what do we do? And so the problem is that you can see exactly what happened with Iraq when against the absolute recommendation of the general at the time, the Obama administration didn't keep the troops there, at least 10,000, which was what the recommendation was, to the 15,000, and didn't keep the troops there. And then what happened is that Maliki now looks around, and there is an administration does have an excuse as to why. I can go into that later if you want, but so Maliki's there by himself. He's got no one to really advise him. We got the State Department, semi-occupying the world's biggest embassy, and we really withdrew from helping his administration work out. We withdrew from helping the Iraqi army help out. And next thing you know, is they make it much more. Again, he doesn't have any other allies. Now his biggest allies become the most sectional sort of people, the most Shia-centric sort of people, because there's no moderating influence. So, he's got to find friends somewhere. Next thing you know, he replaces a bunch of people who are actually pretty competent in the army with some of these, more factional sort of people. And next thing you know, the whole thing gets hollowed out. So, and then, ISIS comes along, pushes a little bit with just a couple of thousand guys against an army which is like tens of thousands, and the army folds because no one was there to actually make sure that the things that need to happen were actually happening.
That's unbelievable. What causes this unwillingness on the part of the American government? Is it just politics? I mean, we go in, obviously we invaded, but like we've just been describing, that unwillingness seems to take over. It's like a cancer that slowly leaks its way into the policy. Rather than saying, this is what we got to do, we're obviously going to have to stay here, that's it, this is the policy, and we're going to make a success of this. We've seen it in Vietnam, but we keep doing this. What causes that? Do you know? Do you have an idea?
Well, I can guess.
Yeah. Just tell us what you think.
So my guess on it is this, is America is a world power. It's the sole superpower. And so and if we look back and see what happened with the British empires, they got sick of being the British Empire, and they stopped doing it. And so it takes a certain amount of willpower to actually do superpower kinds of things. And so America, basically after Vietnam, I think that they were a bit traumatized with that, and they were just like, we really, the superpower thing, it's difficult, and I think it becomes, as every decade goes on, people find it more difficult to muster the willpower to act like a superpower. And so what happens is that then you get to the point where now a huge number of people just are sort of like in this country, and I'm guessing that the occupants of the White House is, up there in this as well, are simply saying, this is not something we want to be doing. We have better things to do. But unfortunately, somebody does actually have to be the superpower in the world. Someone has to be adult in the building. And the reason is because it's in our own best interest to have actual, the economy, the trade, the working together of the world system. Someone has to be the ultimate sort of like authority.
Are these nations behaving themselves?
Yeah.
I mean, it spills everywhere. Look at Israel. Look at their problem that they're having. Do you see the same thing in the media with the reporting that's going on with Israel vis-a-vis to Gaza? Do you see the biasness that's going on in there? The same thing that kind of happens when you were in Afghanistan and Iraq. Is it the same people sitting in hotels, getting their news from other people, and just spitting the stuff out, and not enough people embedded in there?
Well, honestly, I've been to visit Israel and Egypt, but I've not been to Gaza myself, so I don't really know the situation exactly. But I will say this: there's always a problem in asymmetrical warfare. which is basically what that is. That is like, you know, the Israelis have like enormous military force, and Hamas doesn't. And so they hit back in whatever way they do. And so it's difficult because then you're like, oh, look, you guys are like really clobbering these guys and taking out all these other things. Well, unfortunately, that is the nature of war. Is like, you know, if you have asymmetrical stuff going on, and this is why, and I think that it's difficult because there's so many complex sort of like side tangential sort of things about it. For instance, like people would say, people as terrorists back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s would say, you know, this is so much more humane, the fact that we go around killing people. Because, like, you know, when you guys, when people fight real wars, is that you will do something like Dresden or Hamburg, in which case 40 or 50,000 or 60,000 people die in a single evening. And for us, shoot, we only killed 25. So, you know, we're the more humane thing. But the problem is that it's such a difficult thing for people to get their mind fully around because, let's face it, people are busy, you know, it's just like, it's difficult to understand the nuances of all this, and so, but unless you understand the nuances, you can't understand the morality behind which side is really more moral or not. And so it's almost, it boggles the mind, and the problem I would say about the media is that there are very, very few people in the media, as in Congress, who have like spent a lot of time in the trenches.
Let's shift to what's going on down at the border too. I mean, obviously we have thousands and thousands of kids and all sorts of illegals coming into the country. They're being quite literally bused, plane, trained, all over the country. Again, getting back to your journalism career, what are you hearing from people? What are you seeing down there? Have you been down there at all? Have you been able to?
I've not been down there, but I've seen some really, really good reporting on it. And I mean, the Arizona Republic newspaper did a terrific series, so they actually not just did that, but then they went down to Central America and looked at what was going on, and I would recommend just Googling that online with, like, you know, immigration crisis with Arizona Republic, really illuminating. And so the thing is that what happens is, I think, is that you've got all these people coming over, and, you know, putting my, you know, more political hat on, is that you look at this and you wonder, you know, why isn't the government doing anything other than saying, well, we're just going to put them in the system and the system will sort it out, and there you go. And instead, they say things which are, to my mind, don't really make sense, such as, and I understand we're not going to be getting, you know, any more children up here in Massachusetts, but they say things like, well, we'll put them on a base, an Air Force base, and they'll be out of here in 3 months, and you just simply know that that doesn't make sense. It's hardly possible to see how that would even be true. So, and that's unfortunately, that sort of like goes into the whole thing about, you know, people aren't stupid, and the government sometimes says things which boggle the mind, and then ceases or doesn't follow through and explain itself in such a way to where people can even figure out what the heck they're talking about. And that just undermines people's faith in the government, and that's not good for America, when people don't believe the government anymore. And that immigration thing, that is a hidden sort of side issue, is that the things the government says about some of these things in terms of, like, you know, like, oh, they'll be here for 3 months, then they'll be going somewhere else, or, you know, sure, we'll send them back, you know, after they've got their hearing, but then nobody shows up at the hearings, you know, and there's no follow-up, and people are just like, they're not stupid, they see what's happening.
Right.
And it's bad news, and I don't think that the government really understands how much people really get upset because they're being taken for suckers.
As a potential state rep, how would you address a situation like that? I mean, obviously, you know, this is an issue that's going to have to be decided. There's a lot of them already here. One of the questions I've asked some of the other candidates is, you know, as American citizens, we have to jump through hoops with our children. We have immunizations, birth certificate, we have to fill out gaggles and paperwork to make sure that everything's all right and they can attend school in the fall. But there seems to be a big path that's going to go along with these people. And as a potential rep, I mean, how are you going to deal with this?
Well, this is the thing. You can also look at it and say, why does the media not ask many of the questions that really should be asked? And I think as a state rep, you have to sit there, you are representing your constituents, and your constituents want to know what the heck is going on. And so the best thing you can possibly do is say, you know, Governor Patrick, I understand that you're saying that these people will only stay for 3 months, but clearly, like, this is the reason that won't happen, and then this is what's going to happen next, and this is what's going to happen next. Lay it out what's going to happen, and then say, now we need to have answers on all of these things because our constituents need to know these answers. And what happens is that is the traditional role of the media. But on some of these things, it's such a hot button issue that I think that the media can only cover so much. And that's when it really comes down to the specifics, and where a good state rep is able to say, no, we've looked into it, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is exactly what the people in the town say is going to happen, and this is the shortfall they're going to face because they don't want it to be on them, or maybe they do if the government can help them out, but of course the government won't help them out because you said that this won't happen. And so what the state reps really need to do is represent the interests of the constituents and say,
it's like a journalist or something.
Yeah, and then you wonder, but this is almost the traditional role of the media, and in the sense that the media should go and say, oh, well, okay, now and I'm going to talk to like this town and this person who actually deals with these sort of issues, and we're going to find out exactly what happened with the people that came here before and where they are now and how many people those people showed up at the hearings, and why is none of this working. And so as a state rep, you really have to come through, and then you also, because you're a state rep, then you have to sort of say, okay, given that, this is the solution we would need. If you're gonna bring in X number of people, then we would need to get this much money from the federal government to cover that, and that would need to go to the towns who are going to get this.
Exactly.
And so you supply not just the questions, but the solution at the same time.
Exactly. Is it political? Are they looking for more Democratic voters? You hear that a lot. Do you think that's a viable?
This is the thing that I don't honestly, in good conscience, say that any politician who thinks about it for more than 3 seconds in this state would encourage people, underage people, to come across the border with all that attendant danger of kidnapping, rape, murder, being lost, disappeared, to come all the way up from El Salvador, from Costa Rica, from Guatemala, from all those places, and put their lives at risk just to get thrown back out of the country. So this is the thing. So that's not what they're trying to do. So what are they trying to do? What they're trying to do is they're going to help people as best they can. But the problem is that there's a law of unintended consequences. Yes. And when you start to help people in such a way that you are now encouraging tens of thousands, 100,000 people to come across the border, risking their lives, absolutely some of those people will die, will be murdered, will be raped, will be lost, will never be reunited with their families. When you are setting them up to fail, is that you are creating a system of disincentives which is hurting people's lives.
Now, we've had this happening. Obviously, illegal immigration has been happening in America for a very long time. But what caused this? It seemed almost overnight. You woke up the next morning, and there's a newspaper on your front step, and there's just trailloads of these people. What happened? How did that happen?
Well, anecdotally, there's a 2012 executive order called DACA, which delayed action for
sure. Yes.
And which basically, this is the problem in the third world, okay, is that many people down there don't read very well. And so what happens is that you put in an executive order, or whatever happens, but the word gets out down there.
Sure.
That, I'll tell you what, hey, all you guys, if you go north and you're under 16 years old, they won't kick you out, you can stay there forever. Not only that, but we can go and join you too. And so what happens is that things like this word gets out, next thing you know, everybody's packing their bags and heading to the north. And the problem with this is that it's not actually correct. If you look at provisions of that act or that executive order, is that anyone who actually packs up, goes north, and has family here in the United States is specifically not covered by that executive order. But that's not what's told to those people down there. So they're all told, go on up there, and you'll be reunited with anyone you know up there as part of your extended family, and you are good to go. But in actual fact, when you look at the provisions, it's not true. So the bad information gets down there.
Right, and that's what they go on.
Yeah, but the reason that bad information is started in the first place is because they did something to help people, which without really thinking it through, and help people in such a way that probably wasn't such a good idea in the first place.
But this thing is unconstitutional, though. I mean, you can't. I know it's an executive order, but executive orders are supposed to be for national emergency. Something horrible happens and we have to act. 9/11, okay, we can argue about the Patriot Act that came after that, but that's what an executive order is for. This is just, I can't get away from this. It smells of politics. It really does. And that's why I asked you that question earlier about, are they looking for more Democratic voters? What is the reason behind it? But I don't know if we have the answer without somebody actually coming forward and spelling it out. Yes, Mr. Bader, you are right. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so the actual constitutionality of executive orders is quite a little bit beyond me, because I think a lot of presidents have done similar things, but I'm not so sure that they've done things in exactly the same categories. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. But the whole thing is, it's a difficult situation where basically you are pitting segments of the population in the United States, pro and against an issue such as illegal immigration. Everybody should simply understand, and I think everybody should and does agree, is that illegal immigration is not good for the country, which is why we have laws. And simply, and to say now that, illegal immigration is like a good thing or a bad thing, now we're fighting amongst ourselves. It's just, there's a reason there's a law, because it was passed by Congress and it's deemed constitutional, and the laws indicate that illegal immigration is illegal. So, and it's just sad that our, politics has descended to the point where now we have to be fighting each other over something which is simply been deemed by the Congress and by the President not to do the right thing.
But this is one of the reasons why you're running. Let's get into your campaign. Tell us some of the ideas that you have. Tell us about what you want to do. It says here you want to increase wages and incomes, growing businesses and jobs. And I've spoken a lot about this with a lot of the candidates. A lot of the issues that you have here, this is another reason why the symposium on the 30th is going to be very, very interesting, is we're not going to be all debating and pointing fingers and cross-talking each other. Everybody, and I've looked through my list, and I've interviewed a lot of the people that are coming here, we're all on the same page. We all know what the problems are. We all have different solutions, but that's the key thing. We all know what the problems are. So why don't you talk to us about your campaign and what you have planned?
Well, the idea is that there's a lot of things that should be happening that simply aren't happening. Right. So, if you look at a host of things, there are so many good things we could be doing. So let me just, at the risk of doing a laundry list, let me just pick out a couple of things which I find near and dear to my heart. One is I look at the elderly in this state, and as they get old, what happens is that their property taxes continue to go up. I don't see why we can't be somewhat like Rhode Island, which caps elderly people's property taxes when they reach 70. And that seems to me that people on a fixed income, and right now when you talk with advocates of homeless people, of the elderly, they say it's a huge problem, that it's not just something that happens every once in a while, but simply people who their property tax goes up, and obviously it can mean to a certain extent, but you really should include almost everybody, is that what happens is that people start getting thrown out of their houses for very, very small amounts of money. And so I think that if we had a budget surplus of over $1 billion over the last 2 years, we should set some of that aside and help cities and towns help elderly people stay in their own home. And here's another idea that helps the elderly, since we're on the subject of the elderly. Right now, if you are a person, you're a couple, and you are one of the people, your spouse goes into the nursing home. Well, and you own a home, is that the state puts a lien on your property once you get down.
I have a friend who's going through that right now.
Once you get down to $119,000 is what you get to keep out of your house. You get to keep. So if you sell your house, the state will take everything above $119,000, and because they've got a lien on it now before the state assistance kicks in. Well, my thought is that what that means is that if you are an elderly person and your husband or wife goes in a nursing home, and now now you decide that the house is too big, it's too expensive to keep up, and you want to move up. Well, the government's been paying for your spouse's nursing home bills, and so now it's going to lien on your property, and the only thing that you have left at your house is $119,000. That works out to roughly 6 years of rent. That works out to an apartment you cannot afford to buy. That means that you cannot afford to move out of your house into something smaller because the government hasn't left you enough to do so. So my suggestion would be raise that up to $200,000 because you know that when the second spouse who is living in the home finally gets in the nursing home, that the government will get that money. And so the thing is that it's what you're doing is by setting that limit at $119,000 is you are making life unbearably bad for thousands and thousands of the people who really deserve better.
Certainly. Businesses in Massachusetts. Again, I was interviewing another candidate, and a piece of information that came by was that since Deval Patrick, there have been no new net jobs in Massachusetts. And what he meant by that is nobody, an entrepreneur from somewhere else, has quite literally said, I want to go to Massachusetts and set up my business. I want to go there and take advantage of that workforce or those tax breaks or whatever the lack of regulations are and start my business there. That has never happened since Deval Patrick has taken off. In fact, what has happened, from my own research, everything is flat and or negative. Same thing with population. Our population growth is either flat or negative. In fact, we've lost congressional representation because of our population growth. So how are we going to address this problem?
So we're about third from the bottom when it comes to the business costs, as in we're third from the top. We're third from the worst when it comes to business costs. The cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that is an immediate disincentive for people who are saying, hey, shall we do business here in Massachusetts? Second thing is like, so another thing to think about as a precursor to like answering it is that most jobs are generated by small businesses, 87%.
87, yeah, something like that, yeah. It's a huge number.
And so at the same time, as a state, we do dumb things like have an inventory tax, which hits small businesses unusually hard because small businesses can least afford to pay inventory tax.
And one person I said it hits the distributors hard because they have the warehouses full of all the stuff that we need to be stocked in the store. And what amazed me is I thought to myself, and I didn't really know the minutiae of the inventory tax. Basically, you're being taxed on stuff that's in your building. And I mentioned, I said, this made me think for a minute, and maybe you can add to this. That, well, given the automatic gasoline tax and the way everybody up at Beacon Hill just loves taxes, there's just any tax that they can find out. I mean, it's only a matter of time before they come to you or me and say, oh, you've got 3 couches, 2 TVs, oh, a washer and a dryer, okay. And then we get taxed on that.
Asking for trouble. What people might not know is that for the inventory taxes, out of $30 they collect, and it's all collected by towns. So the town has the burden of actually figuring out who has what, which is a complete pain in the neck for the town collector. I feel bad for them. But out of that $30, 29 of it goes to the state, not the town. So the town is getting like almost nothing.
They're doing the work and only.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of dumb. So it's like really bad. And so you have the inventory tax, and then like if you look at that as what we used to have, like independent contractors were quite easy to do. As a freelance reporter for a long time, I was an independent contractor, and I think that that's a fair statement to say. Is that and yet now we make it very, very difficult for people to hire people as independent contractors because if you're like say a housewife and you're say on your husband's insurance, or if you're like a college student or something like that, it'd be quite easy to like make some extra cash. But by basically requiring health care costs to be borne by the employers or independent contractors, you're doing away with all of these people that could otherwise be on the payroll because it makes it uneconomic for them simply to be hired on.
Here in Massachusetts, we have a pool here for our insurance. Like you can only buy from a certain pool that state agencies allow. There was some talk when the first couple of terms of Deval Patrick about insurance reform. Of course, that quietly got pushed under the rug, and we never heard anything about that again. How would we open that up? I've talked to some people about just, first of all, getting rid of some of the HIPAA laws, and also just opening up the states, getting rid of these pools, and letting somebody like you or me buy insurance from Missouri or Arkansas or from a company that's somewhere else, so that competition can come back in. How are we going to look at that?
Well, I mean, that would make sense. I don't see the downside. I'm not an insurance expert, but I don't see the downside of people having more choice.
Yeah, competition, right?
Yeah. And so, but the thing is, too, is that we have to think about it in terms of when we're looking at pooling people's opportunities, is that we have to like, sure, you get a better deal like that, but at the same time, it's like it's so highly regulated. Some people say that it's regulated, and that's a good way because, like, in Massachusetts, you can't be gouged. Other people say it's bad because it's limited competition. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I'm not an insurance expert, but in general, I would generally say that more competition, more choice is always a good.
Exactly, it definitely drives down prices. So what's next for you as far as campaign events? Where are you going next?
Well, we have like a series of events coming up. There's obviously this public events, there's Native Days, that's going to be a great one, that's in September. There's also, I'm sure you've heard about, there's a huge event in Sherwood on September 20th. That's going to be fantastic. And, then we get people, smaller events around in the neighborhood, people's houses, and then obviously we also are door knocking days out of the week.
Sure.
And, the nice thing about this is, and I'll say this, and I'm not sure if everybody says this, they probably do, but, it's what I think, is that when you look at America, and you look at the way people think, and you look at, why are these people run Americans down? They say, these people, they don't vote, they're kind of, they don't expect much, they should, be more informed on the issues. I'll tell you what, I've been, along with Chris Rasmini, my campaign manager, as well as other volunteers, I've been out on the doorstep since February, since it was 24 degrees out, and it was mighty chilly out there. And so the thing is that, and people are so nice. It's like, people, the Northeast has this reputation of being a terrible place, I don't know about you, I'm not going to talk to you. But people are so nice, and not only are they nice, but this is the unusual thing. People are experts in all sorts of things. And the thing is that and this is one of the reasons.
Let's talk to Chris about that. Yeah, this is all the candidates have been saying that. People are more informed now, and they're more willing. There's no longer, well, I only vote Democrat, I only vote Republican. They're listening to everybody because they're fed up. Are you seeing that?
Well, absolutely. They're very absolutely not happy with what's going on. But this is the funny thing too. It's like, is that you will get people on the campaign trail who know more about education than I ever will. You'll get people on the campaign trail who know more about growing jobs than I ever will. Because that is literally what they've been doing for 45 years. And when you listen to these people and they say things like, hey, I was a social worker working for the Veterans Administration. The federal government ran out of money. I got laid off. A couple of other people did too. And I'll tell you what, the state had no money to hire us back. So now 100 guys, homeless veterans that we used to help, don't have anyone helping them anymore, then you have to take that as a gospel truth. Because I'll tell you what, that lady knows exactly what she's talking about. And the thing is that people, it is a strength of our government that people are able to give their inputs, and that is the tragedy of Massachusetts as it's been, is that people get turned off and they no longer want to give input to the government, because the government is seen as a one-party state that is not responsible to them, and that is a huge tragedy because we have the best people in the country.
It's going to change, huh? I have a feeling it's going to change.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that it's looking at this in Afghanistan when I was there, is that I spent a lot of time training the local governments to harness their own energies from their own programs, and not just give lip service to it by overseeing NGOs, but I encourage them to do things like, hey, you guys want to repair wells? You guys can run it. We're going to find the money, but you will run every aspect of repairing these wells. And as a background for that, I, as a USAID official, was monitored and was responsible for making sure that $200,000 to dig wells was spent properly to get roughly 80 wells. As the Afghan government, working with them, is that we talked it over with the military, and they ended up fixing for $100, $125 each, 550 wells for $45,000.
Because you put it in their hands and they found a better way and a cheaper way to do it.
Yep,
Hello, doesn't that sound familiar? Wow. It's called entrepreneurialism, really.
And this is what would happen too, and it's funny because what would happen is that you would, they'd call up the contractor, and then they'd have, I would call up the contractor with our interpreter, and then they'd be like, blah, 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 how much does it do? And he'd be like, and then he'd be like, oh, well, a new well, $2,500. And I'd be like, no, we don't want the American price, we want the Afghan price. And if you don't want to give us the Afghan price, talk to the district governor because he's paying for it, because it's his money. And so whenever we did wells, which we occasionally did, big extra ones, but like I said, we repaired mostly, is that we would just simply call up and say, we don't want the American price, we want the Afghan price, because the Afghans are running this, and they would give them $800 to dig a well, not $2,500.
Right.
And so, and the same thing is like it would cost us to repair a well, which had a pipe broken, $125, to dig a new well, $2,500, and the Afghans ran entirely the program that fixed 550 wells by repairing the pipes.
That's unbelievable. And if we could just do that here, just let businesses be businesses.
Yep.
Would you start to peel back some legislation? When you get in, would you look at different type of regulations that are out there that you know are just crippling? Look at the contractor rules and what was the other thing that we mentioned? The inventory tax thing. Yeah. Would you start to look at a lot of those things and start saying, well, wait a minute, let's get a bunch of guys together, caucus this thing, and start peeling back?
Well, this is what I'd really like to do. That's important, but this is the most important thing today. Like, if you look at, like, the big picture, real-life issues that people are really wrecking people's lives, is things like college education. And this is what's not happening right now. People are not sitting down and getting, like, some of the best ideas from the best people in terms of, I don't mean the Harvard people, not the Harvard sort of like, textbook solution. I'm sure the people at Harvard are very smart. But I'm talking about people who can actually figure out ways to drive down the cost of, like, college education, and that's what's not happening. So this is the thing, is like I found over in Afghanistan, is you gather all of the people together. In order to do women's training over there, for instance, we had to get village women, we had to get district governments, we had to get the village owners, we had to get, like, the provincial people, departments, as well as the provincial governor's approval, actually deputy governors. We had to push all that together, and so you have to sit down to come up with a solution. You have to have an idea, and then, like, the idea of this being, college education is way too expensive. We got to find ways of, like, getting around that, and then you have to sit people down and, like, actually come up with a solution. And again, as we talked about before, the job of the state rep is to represent the interests of the constituents, make sure that they understand what's going on, but it's also to develop solutions. And the problem is with our one-party state, this is another big problem, is that we don't have enough people developing solutions because it's essentially run by five or 10 people. By Walt Patrick, Senate President, by the Speaker of the House, and by, like, a handful of other people. That's okay. If you're going to run a state with millions of people, you really want 5 or 10 people to come up with all the ideas?
Really, this is true. Ladies and gentlemen, he's running out of the 5th Middlesex District. My good friend, State Rep candidate, Doug Grindle. Doug, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for
a great interview. Thanks for all that. Thanks for all that experience going into Afghanistan, reporting on that. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate it. You do a terrific job.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, sir. We'll see you guys on the 30th.
Terrific.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Doug Grindle, ladies and gentlemen.